My name's Sian and I'm the Higher Education Manager at Yeovil College University Centre, and I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you to today's Research Festival, Problem Solving in a Changing World. Today you're going to get to hear from a range of our students at the University Centre about the research that they've been undertaking this year. You're also going to get to hear from some of our staff who've been undertaking research alongside their roles within the college. Fundamentally, research is all about asking a question and trying to find an answer. It's about wondering why something happens. It's about spotting a pattern. It's about looking at a question and thinking, I wonder why, and then setting about to solve it. You don't have to go to some ancient building halfway across the country to find people with, long beards and funny hats to get cutting edge research. It's happening right here in Yeovil. And equally, if you love your facial hair and have a penchant for a funny hat, you would be very welcome here too. There is some absolutely outstanding research that you're going to find out about today, from how businesses can recruit and attract high quality talent, to how children's mental health has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic and how we can support them to recover. Today we'll cover a huge range of topics and we're really excited about the range of areas that you're going to be able to get your teeth into. If you're watching this event live as it's broadcast on the 17th of June, you're going to get the chance to interact with our speakers, and you can use the chat function to type in your questions and we'll provide you with answers. If you're watching this event after it's been broadcast on the 17th of June, that's fine as well, and if you've got any questions at all, just get in touch with us. You can drop us an email on university.centre@yeovil.ac.uk, or you can give us a call on 01935 845454. So without further ado, I am absolutely delighted to pronounce today's event open. So first of all today, we're going to be hearing from business. Now at Yeovil College University Centre, we have both the Higher National Diploma in Business and also the BA Honours in Business Management and Strategy, so we've got a full degree route here. First of all, we're going to hear from Richard, who is one of our Level 5 students on the Higher National Diploma in Business. After we've heard from Richard, we're going to hear from Graeme, who's a member of our teaching staff here. He's actually the programme leader for our degree level business courses, and about some of the research he's undertaking into how small firms can find startup equity.
Richard Murphy. I'm a second year Business and Management H&D student at the University Centre in Yeovil, and today I'm going to be participating in the college's Research Festival, where my recent activities that I've been undertaking were in the form of a research project into the topic of talent management. So what I'm going to do today is, obviously you'll hopefully have the slides on the screen as well, and I'll be looking at these and referring to them so I can hopefully guide you through and provide some more structure to what we're going to be talking about over the next 10 minutes or so. So firstly, just really wanted to sort of guide you into the structure and the contents of today. So firstly, we're going to do a quick introduction into the research project itself. Secondly, I'm going to discuss my approaches and the methodologies that I uncovered and then implemented to thirdly obviously gain the results. And then fourthly, I'm going to basically provide a conclusion and a summary for you just in terms of what I found and whether there's any sort of challenges I faced as well, which may have implemented and impacted the research project itself. So, getting to the meat and bones of this, basically I was in a research project into the topic of talent management, and my title was How Significantly Does Talent Management Support the Achievement of Corporate Goals? Now, I really wanted to provide a bit of background to that and a bit of context to it as well to really bring this to life more. So, picture 30 years ago, society was a lot different then. People firmly believed in what we sort of called, jobs for life. There were clear career paths. You generally enter an organisation after leaving school. And there were also very good reward systems like final salary pensions that made it really attractive for employees to stay loyal to that organisation and not have a motive to leave because they were being rewarded both sort of financially and non-financially. Now, however, the rise and fall of, economic events such as the financial crash in the 21st century rippled through many organisations in more ways than just profitability and share values decreasing. Previously, many companies, were starting to make a shift towards a more transactional relationship with their workforce, and mainly probably because of digital advancements were replacing, core jobs, and senior leaders were really sort of become progressively accustomed to treating employees at the same time like machines that had a means to an end. And conversely, shock events in a macroeconomic environment, they're always a catalyst for change, whatever happens. And in an economic sense, that's something called creative destruction, whereby you have these long-standing practices that just get shaken to their core, and then organizations and the economy sort of just rebuilds itself from the very ashes into something completely different. And that's what we found in society today. So not only did this impact in an economic sense, but it also changed the behaviours of senior leadership, because what they soon began to realise was that the further that technology was advancing, the further humans were becoming distant from their customers. And there's never an organisation that can solely just rely on computers and artificial intelligence to deliver them into the future and reach their ambitious goals that they have. And this is why talent management has become much more prevalent, because basically, the business environment is more aware that employees are a really core aspect to any business. Now, the rise in, trade unions, they really changed the dynamic in employee rights. But when it comes to talent management, you sort of think about companies that are like Google, Facebook and Dyson, that fundamentally changed the way that people and organizations, are attracted, retained and motivated to work in a organization. And that's why, I chose a title of How Significantly, which is the pertinent word here. So again, how significantly does talent management support the achievement of corporate goals? Because, talent management has become much more pivotal, and there's been a greater reliance between an organisation, a senior leadership team and the employees all working in harmony to deliver them to the future. Yet, interestingly, there's, some markets and some organisations that haven't really adapted to that. And there's sort of a general feel, just from sort of doing a bit of cursory, looking on the internet into news articles, that a lot of the larger bureaucratic organisations who generally operate, on oligopolistic and monopolistic markets haven't really changed, because they sort of feel they're too big to change. So yeah, this project itself will hopefully just uncover, what businesses are doing, what they're doing to attract employees in terms of bringing them into the future, succession planning, and also what degree that's helping them evolve and achieve their corporate goals. So what that's also going to do is, uncover some sub-themes as well. So we've got, corporate goals, reputation, profitability, sustainability, and diversity and inclusion. And the main objectives that I took to take this research project into a structured format was A, establish the project aims, objectives and milestones. B, carry out and analyse the primary and secondary research. C, deliver the results to the stakeholders. And D, consider the application of relevant research methodologies and concepts. So moving on to slide 4 now. So this is all about the approaches and methodologies. So, it's quite generic, and I think obviously people are quite familiar with these types of activities, but it really helps shape how I gathered my data. So I used a blend of quantitative and qualitative information to make sure that I was getting the right balance there to get the relevant and correct information. Primary research, so that included interviews, survey, questionnaires and focus groups. Secondary research, so looking through books, articles, journals, professional reports. And then obviously, the order investigation. So we've got primary research here and secondary research second, but actually you do those back to front because you want to do all of your information gathering, through secondary research, and then using that primary research to help, plug those gaps that you couldn't find with the secondary research. So results. So as you can see on slide 5, I've taken here 2 samples for you of my primary research, which I think is probably quite relevant to have a look through. So this, shows you here through doing a SurveyMonkey, questionnaire to a lot of different companies, just the different, themes and topics and trends that people are feeling. And I thought that was really, really key information. And, what really strikes a chord here is that I think it's the 4th one down, having a career plan makes you more engaged. You can see that, a lot of employees found that they really strongly agreed with that. And that obviously nestled into talent management because they're creating a pathway for employees to actually feel like they're part of the journey and giving them a structure to be part of the organisation going forward as well, which will help retain them. So, that I think is probably something that I found really beneficial. I did a lot of, primary research in different aspects, from doing surveys, and also did a few interviews as well, which I'll come on to shortly in my conclusion. The secondary research, that was great. It acted as a really good foundation for me to look at a wide variety of materials online and through reputable books. And that really sort of sown the seed of actually, what are companies doing now and how it's changed from the past to the future. And obviously, with all the research, there's the challenges. And, notwithstanding, I think we are in a very unprecedented time, as much as a cliche that sounds. So there's really sort of 4 aspects here, which was the time I had to do it. And that was obviously because of the type of course I'm doing. I'm set to a particular timescale I need to get it done by, in addition to working full-time as well. A budget, there wasn't a budget for this. So obviously we're trying to do it using resources that are free and available online. Resources, I couldn't draft in anybody else to support me with this. It's a research project done independently, so it's up to myself to manage my time efficiently and make sure I resource myself in the most efficient ways possible. And then COVID, that's the sort of tip of the umbrella that impacted everything else. So COVID obviously put a really big dent into a lot of the things we tried to do, and it's really just in terms of the efficiency and the swiftness I could get this done. Gathering information was obviously the biggest task, and that was very difficult to do when you couldn't actually go to an employer's workplace, you couldn't do face-to-face interviews, you couldn't do focus groups. So that obviously again made a massive difference to how I had to approach the results that I gathered. So obviously what I'm going to come on to now is the conclusion on slide 6. And this really sort of pulls out all the key information from the results that I found and really sort of highlights what I found in reference to my title. So obviously, just to reinforce it again, hopefully you can see it on here, but the title was How Significantly Does Talent Management Support the Achievement of Corporate Goals? So I really sort of found this came down to 5 key aspects. The first one was employee engagement. So what I uncovered was that companies with a talent management process in place by far have a more engaged workforce, which in turn significantly supports corporate objectives because people feel more valued and more engaged to help the company achieve their goals because they feel like they're having an interest in them as an individual rather than just a means to an end. Secondly, it boosts performance. So talent management definitely should be considered a key, corporate objective, as evidently through the research, it's linked to, significantly boosting a company's performance at the same time. Thirdly, it comes down to retention. So looking through, the demographic of when I was doing the research and the people that were responding, you could tend to feel that sort of Generation Z, so 1995 to 2009, and Generation Alpha, so 2010 plus. Obviously, I didn't really have too many of those people in my research itself and the data. But, predominantly Gen Z have less ties to companies as staff benefits have reduced. Final salary pensions are now extremely rare, resulting in it being more easier to move organisations. So thus, it makes talent management extremely important as it helps retain valuable staff who could, just leave an organisation because they haven't got any ties to them anymore. And then on the contrary, through doing the interviews, I actually found that it was quite interesting because I did an interview with somebody who is part of Generation Z and then somebody who was part of the baby boomer generation. And the person in the baby boomer generation had shares held in the company. And regardless of the talent management system in place, they felt that essentially because they had shares in the company, they were more motivated to help it succeed because obviously they were going to be getting a financial reward. So that evidently linked to performance. So that was quite an interesting perspective that I found, that actually people who have shares in companies are actually quite motivated to help a company achieve their corporate goals as well, because they are technically a stakeholder and they do own part of that business, which means they can be rewarded if the share price increases and the performance is good. And then finally, succession planning and sustainable growth. So talent management not only supports corporate goals, but will significantly, and I mean that as a very pertinent assertion here, significantly future-proof an organisation by having a really good succession plan in place. Because, like I said before, people are feeling more liberated at the moment in time because they can just move from organisation to organisation without having the restraint that they might lose long-standing rewards and benefits. So by having talent management in place, it enables companies to nurture their employees, to make them more in line with their values, and then make them into somebody who grows with that organisation and helps bring that organisation into the future, as well as taking somebody who could be the next CEO of the company that's gone through the ranks at the same time. They feel more valued, they feel more engaged in the company, and they feel more motivated to help them achieve their corporate objectives. So I think in summary, what this has really established is that talent management, compared to 30 years ago, it was just a common everyday thing that people did sort of unconsciously in an organisation. But now it's had a lot more focus and it's a lot more prominent because people don't have those ties anymore. And by having a talent management system in place, it significantly helps those companies achieve their corporate goals. And these corporate goals could be down to profitability, it could be whether they're looking to grow, and it could even be to what they're looking to do in society. So by having that talent management system in place, people are saying more engaged, more motivated, and ultimately that helps the company achieve and overachieve their corporate objectives. So I hope you found this session informative. Apologies, it's probably gone on for a few minutes longer, but it's definitely an interesting topic and something that we're all surrounded by every day, and I hope you found the information and insights here quite valuable and beneficial and interesting as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Hello, I'm Graeme Tate. I'm the Programme Leader for the BA Business Management and Strategy course here at Yeovil College University Centre. I'm also the Module Leader for the Corporate Financial Management module, which forms part of that programme. And what I'm going to speak to you today is one of the tasks that our students were asked to consider as part of one of their assignments. And the task that they were looking at was the options available for startup companies to raise equity. Now, their question that they were set were the options available for startup companies to raise equity. And of course, you probably sat there now and think, oh, that's quite a quite a general topic. But personally, I think this was a fantastic problem to set the students because it's extremely relevant to students who are perhaps looking to leave university and have identified a fantastic business idea. Okay, so you can imagine the situation. We don't have to be students, it could be you or I, where we've identified what we think is a brilliant business idea, but how are we going to go and fund it? We might need £50,000, £100,000. We might need to buy stock. We might need to get, professional advice, legal advice from accountants. How are we going to go and fund it? And I think this is what's really, really a sort of research question that I think is really sort of exciting for our students to look at. And I think how I encouraged our students to look at it was to approach the problem to say, well, put yourself in that position. Okay, put yourself in the position that you've got this fantastic idea and you need to generate funding in order to get this into practice. And the questions looking at equity people buying shares in our company where we've got this brilliant business idea. And it was important that it was looking at that, because it's not looking at debt. Okay, it's not looking at that, because at this point, it's normally quite unlikely for a bank or another lender to offer debt finance for an idea. Okay, so you could imagine going to the bank and saying, I've got this brilliant idea, can you lend me £100,000? The banks may well turn around to you and say, yeah, here we go, yeah, we think you've got a really good idea and might take security and therefore for it. But they're likely potentially to say, well, actually, that's too much of a risk for us. So we were just purely looking at equity finance. And this allows us then to bring us back in full to our initial question, those options available for our startup company to raise equity. So what we've done this is then really now want to focus on equity and look at researching those things. And the things, therefore, that we were looking to research would be, ordinary shares, preference shares, business angels, and venture capital as well. Okay, and they were going to be the fundamental areas. They're not going to be entirely all the areas, but they were going to be a really good start for us. And this is now where we can undertake our fundamental research. It's there is of course a wealth of advice articles on the internet. You search, I'm sure if you went and Google search now, advice for my business idea, you'll just get swamped and inundated with loads of different options. But this is a level 6 research project or research answering a level 6 question. And what we mean by level 6 is that's the final year of a degree. Okay, that's final year of a degree. So a final year of a degree, a level 6 project requires us to undertake critical analysis. Okay, so as a result, the vast majority of research won't be those internet articles. It will be using books, your professional articles, journals that would have been available or are available from our learning centre. Okay, and that will allow us to sort of look at different viewpoints and get that sort of real quality research and be able to build on that in our response to the question. But always making sure that we're staying relevant to the assignment task, then relevant to that question. And in doing that, it helps maintain focus when researching and stops you really going off topic and wasting your time. So always coming back to this, the fact that we've got this brilliant idea, how are we going to fund it through equity or share funding? Okay, and then the level of research by using those established research tools allows a critical analysis by considering the implications of each stage of equity finance, and the things that we want to make sure we consider. So, we can have the situation where family, it doesn't have to be close family. It could be a great aunt, great uncle could say, wow, that's a brilliant idea. I'd love to be part of that. I'll buy some, I'll give you some money. I'll buy some shares off of you. But also then thinking, once that initial excitement goes, you've got the issue that they could lose all their investment if your idea doesn't go to plan. And does that therefore create any issues within the family? Okay. Also, looking at business angels, fantastic. Not only would they give us the funding, but they may also have some very useful business contacts and expertise of their own. But it's likely, if you think of Dragon's Den, they are, to all intents and purposes, business angels. They expect a large amount of equity in return for their investment. So you might see them and they say, yeah, we'll give you £50,000, but we want X% of your equity. And the reason being is that it is a risky job investing in brand new startup ideas. Okay, so they know that a lot of those are going to fail, but the ones that don't, they want to make sure they've got enough enough return to take into consideration that initial risk that they've involved. So those are all things that we consider. Once we've then researched and explained, we're then necessary to ensure that when we were concluding, we were fully focused on that original scenario. That's what we want our students to be, fully focused on that original scenario. So it's then possible to conclude what advice you would give in terms of the options that are available, okay, in order to raise equity, okay. And bringing that focus there means that we thoroughly answer that original question. Okay. So I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of an insight into that research question, and I think it just gives you a really good insight in terms of the sort of requirements of of a level 6 program, remembering this is level 6, a final year of a degree. So, we work our students up to, level 6. They may start, doing a higher national diploma at level 4, and we can see their journey as they go through those sort of levels. But essentially, that's what we sort of aim to achieve for our students towards the end of it. Okay, so thank you very much. Bye.
Next up, we're going to hear from some of our students on the BA Honours Childhood Studies Care and Education degree. We're going to hear from Francis and from Beth about research they've undertaken as part of their final year dissertation projects. Both of these projects are absolutely fascinating and focus on emotional regulation and mental health support for children. So this is really current and really timely research that they've been undertaking.
My name's Francis Abbott, and I've been a student at Yeovil College University Centre since September 2017. Since last September, I've been undertaking the BA Honours degree in Childhood Studies, Care and Education. I've recently handed in my dissertation with a focus on how adults can support children aged 8 to 11 in fostering emotional regulation strategies and how capable those children are at demonstrating an empathetic viewpoint towards their peers. This research piece was a qualitative interpretivist project. I was seeking to explore how children can be supported developing independent emotional regulation skills. I also wanted to find out whether children of that age group are capable of identifying dysregulation in their peers and whether they can empathise with them and support them at times of dysregulation. Children in the UK start school at just 4 years old. For some children, they're expected to be in a classroom conforming to norms and behavioural expectations at just 48 months. By the time a child is 8 years old, they are considered to be in the upper key stages of primary school. They're expected to be responsible, independent, resilient, calm, be learners, and on top of everything else, regulate their emotions during times of turmoil. Personal social health education teaches children a set of strategies which can be adopted during these times. I was keen to explore whether children really do take on board those strategies and use them independently during times of turmoil. I was also keen to find out whether the teaching of personal social health education is really paying lip service to the government and whether children really do need tailored support. For the collection of data, children and teachers were invited to take part in questionnaires. Focus groups were held with 3 groups of children across the age range that I was interested in. The school's SENCO and social, emotional and mental health lead were also interviewed to gain multiple perspectives in a bid to explore my research question. By taking this multimodal approach to the collection of data, I was able to identify 4 key themes: emotional regulation strategies, peer-on-peer empathy, unique child, unique mind, and a digital generation gap. Considering the data of emotional regulation strategies, it became very clear that almost all children are able to identify a method that they rely on during times of dysregulation. However, not all of the strategies which are identified are able to be accessed during a school day. In addition, some of the strategies in which teachers offer to children are not considered by children to be helpful. Slide shows positive outcomes for peer-on-peer empathy shown by children. For the most part, senior leaders, teachers and children alike believe that they can identify negative emotions and dysregulations in their peers and friends. However, further exploration into this highlights that children for the most part can only identify these emotions in peers through physical and verbal cues, such as clenching their fists, shouting, or hitting someone or something. In this slide, we can see that for the most part, children can re-regulate during times of dysregulation. However, further exploration into this shows that staff across the school seem to have learnt their children and their needs. This study was undertaken during the spring term, and by then the children have spent some months with their teachers, who are then able to understand each child and build that bond. In many cases, the teachers are tailoring support for children according to their needs, which highlights further the need for a child-centred approach, and it really does answer the question as to whether one size fits all, the answer being it does not. Interestingly, the majority of children across the 3 focus groups stated that they would use technology as a strategy for calming them down in their naturalistic environments, something that is not provided for in schools and something that socially is frowned upon. The findings of this highlighted a digital generation gap. We're raising a generation of children who are reliant on technology, yet due to the older generation not having had access to such devices during their childhoods, we see this digital divide. We adults think we know best, an age-old, archaic belief. All 4 themes identified throughout the data analysis have one common factor. Unsurprisingly, it becomes very clear that every child, every person, every living being is completely unique. We will never be free from emotions. They are what makes us human. But as a society living in times where we are spoiled with significant research into the field of emotions, it is more important now than ever that we take a humanistic approach to raising our children. This research confirms that children as young as 8 can be empathetic. They can identify strategies that they know work for them, and they can independently regulate their emotions. What works for one child may not work for another, but by adopting a person-centered approach to the way that we handle and teach emotions, we could learn from children. Let them teach us what works for them, because a child who can emotionally regulate is far less likely to become cognitively dysregulated. Thank you for watching.
My name is Beth Wright, and I am currently studying the BA course Childhood Studies, Care and Education at Yeovil College University Centre. Today I'm going to be talking about my qualitative research project titled How Can Schools Effectively Support Children's Mental Health and Wellbeing? Slide 2. This project has been influenced by a change in my professional role. I have recently gained more of a responsibility in supporting children's emotional well-being through interventions and class PSHE sessions. Throughout this project, I have questioned the effectiveness of my role, and I have also questioned the role of schools in supporting children's immediate and future lives. In addition, there has been an element of personal influence. According to Mind, 1 in 4 adults will experience a mental health issue each year, meaning that this subject has likely touched everyone's lives. British society at present is very vocal about mental health. This has been evidenced in movements like the hashtag Be Kind initiative and through campaigns about the spike in men's suicide. It is believed that the current social and political climate is a great opportunity to bring attention to the topic of children's mental health and well-being. Another reason for choosing this topic is as a response to statistical evidence that is showing children's mental health cases are rapidly rising. In 2020, 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16 were identified as having a mental health need. In other words, in an average class of 30 children, like a class that I work in, 5 children may be affected by low well-being, a mental health condition, or they may be facing the secondary impacts of an adverse childhood experience, often referred to as an ACE. The reduced capacity of CAMS, child and adolescent mental health services, and the increased focus on child mental health intervention has meant that childcare and educational settings, exclusively schools, have become expected to take on greater responsibility to support its pupils with an SEMH need. SEMH stands for Social, Emotional, Mental Health. This can be described as the shift from clinical to community care. The findings of this project concluded the following themes: the evolution of the role of schools in supporting children's mental health and well-being, low levels of staff training in the field of mental health, communication between support staff and within parent partnerships was mentioned in the data. There was room for improvement concerning practitioners' awareness and understanding of interventions. Figure 1 is a visual representation of the participants' personal definitions of what effective mental health provision looks like. To pick out a few key phrases: honesty and transparency, support, parent partnership, and good communication. It was important to ask this question because the qualitative study aimed to represent the diversity of opinion. The majority of the definitions were similar to the definition of the project. Figure 2 demonstrates the participants' responses when asked to select the terms that resonated with their roles. The most common terms that were selected were protector, guide, and mentor. Additional terms were also contributed, like collaborator, co-regulator, and friend. I have chosen to include this data in an attempt to reshape some people's misconceptions about the role of educational staff, especially teaching assistants. At this current point in time, the role of the TA has developed significantly to support the integration of children with special educational and emotional needs into mainstream schools. The most interesting finding, in my opinion, was the lack of staff training in the area of children's mental health and well-being. The data showed that 90% of participants had no training in the field of mental health. It should be noted that every participant was keen to take part in this kind of training if given the opportunity by their setting. Although the number of trained staff was low, the data surprisingly concluded that the majority of participants felt moderately confident in being able to teach children about mental health, and they felt confident in being able to support a child through a mental health episode. I question this contradiction. One teaching assistant responded that in our role as educators, we must naturally be able to empathise with children and vulnerable people. She said that mental health training was not a necessity, but it was a luxury. With this in mind, the project strongly advocates for staff training as it builds confidence further and improves outcomes for children. It is vital that cases of serious mental health concerns should be addressed by the most qualified and knowledgeable practitioners in the setting. Figure 4 represents further data from the questionnaires, concluding that 90% of practitioners had witnessed improvements in children's behaviour, mood, and general well-being as a result of intervention. In other words, interventions are an effective and are a key staple part of the approach in supporting children's well-being. The data showed that 57% of participants had concerned that they were not always aware about what was going on in these interventions, like ELSA, Forest School, and Thrive. It is evident that communication needs to improve regarding the purpose and outcomes of intervention. This will provide a continuity of care and will support children holistically. Figure 5 showcases potential future developments that, if implemented, can support schools to more effectively and consistently support children's mental health and well-being. As you can see, the most common areas in which participants held necessary were increased levels of staff training, promoting an increased awareness and focus on mental health, and the implementation of a whole school approach to mental health and well-being. Several of these points are reliant on funding to be actualised. Such funding is simply not available and schools have to spend money creatively. The data from this project has led to some recommendations for practice. Recommendation 1. The first step for improving a settings provision for children with SEMH needs is to carry out an audit of current support, policy and procedure. This is similar to practices that are already in place, like the safeguarding and SEND audits. SEND stands for Special Educational Needs and Disabilities. This audit should include the settings' child mental health and wellbeing aims, ethos, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and most importantly, barriers. This is similar to a SWOT analysis, which is commonly used by students. Recommendation 2 suggests that settings should invest as much as they can into staff training and opportunities for professional development, as this will likely lead to better provision, increased personal and professional confidence, and an enjoyment for the job. Finally, recommendation 3 suggests that settings aim to empower children's voices. Everything we do should be to benefit the children, and by allowing them to contribute their ideas for provision, practitioners are demonstrating active listening and that they are always there to catch children when they fall and to listen to them, in the good times and the bad. The impact on the setting. This project has allowed me to have professional discussions with other practitioners. It has brought attention to the subject of children's mental health. It has allowed for moments for reflection, personal reflection and reflection as a setting. The head teacher has a lot of plans next year linking to mental health and well-being. I hope that I am able to support her with this process and have shown my interest in doing so. The impact on children. I have had the opportunity to support children through some incredibly difficult times brought about due to this pandemic. I have carried out a focus group with 3 children who currently have intervention, and they were incredibly positive about how intervention allows them to feel calm, controlled and safe. It is hoped that the findings of this study can support schools to provide the same offer to their students, therefore providing a more universal level of care. Personal impact. The main personal impact of this project is that knowledge of children's mental health has been developed, and consequently my confidence and practice in the role of a teaching assistant and pastoral care support assistant has positively been impacted. It is hoped that in reading this project, other practitioners will gain more of an understanding of children's health and therefore prioritise children's emotional needs over academic expectations. On a personal note to finish, I am very thankful to Yeovil College University Centre for the opportunity to carry out this project, and I appreciate all the support given by my course leader, Fiona Pavey. I believe that this research project will be the first of many, and as Vi would say, Beth, you've caught the bug. Thank you for listening.
we're going to hear from engineering. We're going to start off by hearing from some of our students, and then we're going to hear from Simon Weait, who's our Higher Education Programme Manager in Engineering and is also currently undertaking his PhD alongside his teaching role in the college. So we're going to hear again from some students and some staff about what's been happening in engineering.
Hello, my name is Simon Weait and I'm the Engineering Curriculum Programme Manager for Higher Education here at Yeovil College. I have the privilege to introduce you to the excellent research that our students carry out during their time with us while studying for their HNDs or their BEng in mechanical engineering with aerospace. For example, we've had students undertaking investigations into how colour can enhance the cockpit environment and ease the workload for the pilot. We've also had another student investigating how non-destructive testing can be carried out on internal threads of critical aircraft components. There are many of these projects undertaken by our students each year, but today I'll be presenting to you 4 different projects. 3 from students and my own personal project that I'm currently undertaking. The first project is by Tim Osborn, and he is looking into how 3D audio can enhance the cockpit situation for a pilot, mainly in critical and emergency situations. Joe Pope is investigating the application of the Sycamore seed's shape, and could that shape be applied to an Autogyro rotor blade to improve the aerodynamics of the Autogyro? And Tom Strudwick is looking into additive manufacture, 3D printing, and could the 3D printed component be mechanically improved by adding a lattice structure within the 3D print. And my project is looking at how a swarm of 3D printed drones, could they support firefighting operations of high-rise building fires? So enough from me, and over to the presenters.
What do you do when you just can't find your phone? You ring it, you listen for the sound, and you locate your phone. When our vision is impaired or overly taxed, we begin to rely on our ears for the information. Think about crossing a road near to a bend. We know a car is coming when we hear it, and we can usually tell which direction it's coming from, and possibly even a rough idea of how fast it's moving. Audio location is one of the primary ways that humans are able to sense where objects are when they're out of sight. And it's done using complicated processes in your brain, which assess things like which of your ears receive the sound first and loudest, what the time difference between the ears hearing it is, if the sound is getting quieter or louder, if the sound is evidencing Doppler shift. The brain can even sense if a sound is behind you, because it knows the difference between a sound moving straight into your ear compared to having to move through the flesh of your ear. It is this ability of humans to locate audio which sits at the centre of my project. Could this be utilised to improve spatial awareness and reaction times of pilots in a cockpit environment? Well, the first hurdle is that pilots wear headphones. However, the solution to this has been developed by none other than the entertainment industry. The advancements of virtual reality have pushed developers to create 3D audio experiences within the confines of headphones. In order to do this, they have had to develop the ability to mimic sound direction by manipulating the audio to trick the brain into thinking it is somewhere that it isn't. The simplest way anyone could do this is to play the same sound louder into one ear than the other. Our brain will tell us that the sound is coming from the louder side, but that's only really very low resolution, only tracking the sound down to within 180 degrees. In the search to get better at recreating a 3D audio landscape, developers have been layering up all of the different ways that the brain processes the sound to get a listening experience that can place audio in space to a much higher degree of accuracy. It is this sort of software that is utilised in my project. As I have said, the software is being driven by the VR industry, which picks up on another element of difficulty in the development of the software. People rarely keep their head still. To compensate for the movement of the head, the movements must be tracked in real time, and the effects on the audio adjusted simultaneously in order to maintain the audio position in relation to the head. It is well documented that humans even use small head movements to better assess the direction of sound when it appears to be ambiguous. So what is the actual focus of my project? Well, it's based on the following hypothesis. A pilot's awareness of the position of warnings and other cockpit functions that require attention, as well as the awareness of other aircraft, vehicles, or ground operations, can be increased by using a 3D audio landscape to position them in relation to the pilot. This will in turn improve reaction times. Well, with this hypothesis in mind, I searched for research on the principles of 3D audio, as well as studies around environmental factors that have an effect on reaction times. This research brought up information from some interesting places. One project involved the production of 3D audio software to assist visually impaired people to navigate. Another focused on locating audio in virtual space for use in gaming, and another on the processes involved in a pilot's brain when faced with an emergency situation. All of these studies provided evidence that might support my hypothesis. However, of course, it was vital to construct and perform testing to establish the validity of my hypothesis. There were 2 tests conducted for this project. The first test that I did in this project was designed to reinforce other research that shows the human ability to audio locate. It consisted of playing audio which had been manipulated to sound as if coming from a certain direction, and asking the participant to point in the location that they thought it was coming from. This test utilised software capable of mimicking sound direction while simultaneously tracking head movement via a webcam and adjusting the audio accordingly. Well, if you're wearing headphones to listen to this, then we can do a very simplified version of this test. For most of the video, you should have been hearing me right in front of you, but now you should hear me from your right. And now from your left. And now I should be making you a bit dizzy. Well, the results from the first test showed that people are very capable of locating sound in this way, with an average error of only 12 degrees. Interestingly, my research was common with other research in finding that participants were most effective in locating angles in 45-degree sections. In other words, they were most able to locate sound from directly in front of them, 90 degrees left and right, and 45 degrees left and right. The second test evaluated whether the use of 3D audio had any benefit to the response of the participant to commands. The participant was sat in front of a series of cards which each had an individual 3-letter acronym on it. The participant was instructed to touch the cards as quickly as possible after hearing the corresponding audio to the acronym. The test was conducted twice, firstly with regular audio and a second time with 3D audio. The time it took for the participant to touch the cards was recorded. Again, we can conduct a similar experiment with those of you who are wearing headphones. If you're wearing headphones, complete the following tasks. Touch your right shoulder. Touch your left ear. Touch the left of your neck. Touch your right ear. Touch your nose. Hopefully you noticed that you were able to respond more quickly when the audio gave you a clue as to which direction you needed to go. That's what the results from my testing showed. The participants were able to touch the corresponding card over a half a second quicker with 3D audio than with regular audio. These results again point to my hypothesis being correct. Although my testing was less extensive than I had planned due to COVID-19, hopefully you've seen that there is a strong possibility that using 3D audio in a cockpit environment may well enhance both the spatial awareness and reaction times of pilots, and I believe it should be researched further to establish whether the benefits I discovered continue to exist in the loud and complex environment of an active cockpit. So to summarise, all of the participants were capable of localising sound with an impressive accuracy. The best results could be found in 45-degree intervals. During the experiment, all the participants claimed they were able to position the sound with a reasonable degree of accuracy. All participants agreed that 3D audio assisted in performing the commands directed to them in the second test. With these results, it is within reason to suggest that 3D audio soundscapes, with the assistance of head tracking inside an aircraft cockpit, has the potential to increase the capability of pilots to operate, reducing their reaction times and increasing their situational awareness. Thank you for listening.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're well. I thought I'd take a little bit of time to provide an overview of the research project that I've been doing over the course of the last year. My project, as you can see on the screen, is reinventing the design of an Autogyro rotor using Sycamore Seedling-Shaped Aerofoils. We were tasked at the start of the year to come up with a project. And one of the inspirations that I took was the natural world. And being in the aerospace industry myself, I wondered how I could connect these two and come up with a project. And one thing that I looked at was the Autogyro. The Autogyro is a helicopter that is perhaps not used as regularly as other helicopters within the industry. And I wonder whether or not I could perhaps obtain any benefits, any performance gains in an Autogyro. And the key principle that I looked at for this was auto-rotation. The main area that I looked at that I could improve with an Autogyro is the rotors. As you can see in the picture in the top right-hand corner, straight rectangular rotors, and these are what's used most commonly. And I wondered, how could I change that and adapt that to perhaps gain performance in an Autogyro? And one thing that I looked at was a Sycamore seedling. Both an Autogyro and a Sycamore seedling both work on the principle of auto-rotation. And we can see in the graphic alongside on the right here that a Sycamore seedling, when it falls, does exhibit auto-rotation properties. And I thought that because of these, is there a way that I could potentially replicate a Sycamore seedling for the rotor of an Autogyro? So that is what I based my project on. So from that, I thought about a research question and what I could do my project around. And as you can see here, this is my research question. Are there any benefits for the design and performance of an Autogyro in using Sycamore seedling-shaped rotors as opposed to conventional straight rotors most commonly used? So in terms of the benefits, there was two key areas that I wanted to look at, meaning the design and the feasibility. So how easily could the rotors be developed and designed and manufactured, and was it an actual feasible option to have Sycamore shaped rotors? And the other one is the aerodynamics. So of course, for me to use Sycamore seedling rotors, I needed to ensure that the aerodynamics commonly used and exhibited on an autogyro could be replicated using the Sycamore rotors. And for each of these, there were two kind of key areas which I looked at for the research. So for the design and feasibility, I looked at an engineering consultation. So one of my friends that went to university in London at the moment, he is in the aerospace industry, and I had a consultation with him to ascertain his ideas and his views on the topic and whether he thought it was a feasible idea. I also then did a comparative matrix and a number of comparative techniques to compare both conventional straight rotors used on autogyros at the moment, and then also a Sycamore seedling rotor that I'm looking at developing. And then the other area was aerodynamics, and this was done through two ways. So one way was using paper rotors, as you can see on the screen here. It's a simple paper design of a rotor, and it's trying to replicate the sort of shape of a Sycamore. And these were dropped from various heights, the times taken for each, and from that we were able to work out the lift potential and the properties exhibited by these from the time that it took to descend. And the other area which we looked at was using a wind tunnel. This was a more high-tech and precise method, and this was done at Yeovil College using the facilities that they have there. And we took lift and drag measurements of the different types of rotor that we were looking at, mainly being a rectangular rotor on common autogyro, and then a Sycamore rotor on my design, and compared these using a number of aerodynamic studies. So we start with that wind tunnel testing. So for these we had to do some 3D printed aerofoils. So as you can see here at the top of the screen, we've got a rectangular rotor on the right. This is trying to replicate the design of a conventional autogyro. And then we also created on the left there, you see, we tried to create a Sycamore rotor, trying to replicate a Sycamore seedling. And what we did was we mounted these in the wind tunnel. We then did a number of aerodynamic tests on them to get data. And the data that we've collected can actually be shown in the screen, in the graphs here. So the general trends that we can see from this data, fairly similar trends that we can see. The actual shape of the graphs is quite similar, but the main area that we had to look at these graphs, and which is really pertinent to this research project, is the area highlighted in red there. Now you can see that around 13 angular rotation of the rotor, about 13 to 18 degrees there. Whilst all the other areas are the same, within that region, the curved wing, as we can see in the graph at the bottom, actually exhibits greater forces. Now, what we can determine from that is that it's generating more lift, and so actually there may be improved aerodynamic properties of the Sycamores at medium speed intervals, and so that's a real benefit. So when we relate it back to the hypothesis and the research question, there are some clear benefits there of using a Sycamore rotor. Also did some paper rotor drop tests. These were done with the paper rotor that we can see at the bottom of the screen that we've seen before. These were dropped from two different heights. So as we can see there, a mezzanine and the stairs. Stairs at a greater height than the mezzanine, just so that we could get a more rounded picture of them in free fall. We did a number of different rotors. So this we had, you see on the bottom in the bottom left-hand corner, the annotation of the rotor. So we changed the length of the rotor between 50 millimeters and 100 millimeters, and then we changed the width of the rotor as well between a full-size rotor, and then we did 2/3 of that and 1/3, and we graphed those to try and see any trends, any observations that we could see there, and that's why we have 3 different lines on each of these graphs here. So the main real trends that we can see from the data we've collected here is that the the straight rotors, which the more conventional autogyro rotors, they're actually taking longer to hit the floor. Now, whilst it's not a most conclusive way of determining this, we could infer from that because it's taking longer to get to the floor, it's actually producing greater lift potential. And as we can see there, 1.8 for the straight rotor from the mezzanine, and then 1.7 with the spinny Sycamore rotors, and then from the stairs, that's 2 for the straight rotors, and then 1.8 for the spinny rotors. And so actually, from the results that we've collected from that, it would suggest that the straight rotors are actually better in aerodynamic properties in producing lift. So there aren't any benefits from that. Although we will need to do some more investigations into that to get a better judge of those properties. And then another area that we went to was obviously the engineering consultation. I spoke to one of my former colleagues from my old school, who's at City University London. He's doing exactly the same course as us in the aerodynamic field. And there was a number of key points that we took from it, from his responses. So the first one being they are likely to have the optimum shape and design for auto rotation. Now, obviously, we've touched on that before in the presentation, that they are a good auto rotating body. They're a natural auto rotating body, and so they are likely to tend towards having the properties that we need for an autogyro in that regard. One area that he did highlight, which wouldn't be a benefit of Sycamore's, and because it's quite a complex shape, as he said here, extremely thin and lightweight, it would be quite complex to manufacture and quite difficult in comparison to a straight conventional rotor. And that could be quite costly. And so whether or not companies would want to take on that extra cost burden in manufacturing them, I remain to see that. So that's a downside of them. He also mentioned that he failed to see the concept beyond a theoretical proof of concept model. Now, as we've touched on, because of the shape, because of the complexity of them, it is very difficult to manufacture them. And so whilst we are seeing some benefits, as we saw with the wind tunnel, with the improved aerodynamic properties, whilst we do see some benefits, the actual feasibility of making them and integrating them into a helicopter is quite difficult. And as he said there, obviously what he said correlates with the findings that we found, in that he thinks that the shape will lead to an increase in lift and drag. And obviously that's what we found from the wind tunnel results that we collated in Yeovil College using the wind tunnel. And then we also did the comparative analysis. So on the left here, we have a comparison matrix between conventional straight rotors and Sycamore rotors. And then on the right-hand side here, we have a SWOT analysis, which was conducted of Sycamore rotors. So obviously, one area that we've highlighted as being a real benefit is the lift and drag generation. So obviously that correlates with our findings from the wind tunnel, in that the Sycamore rotors do create increased lift. Quite a few downsides to them, again, because the feasibility of actually integrating them is quite difficult. So obviously ease of use, very, very difficult to manufacture, and would actually be rather time consuming to integrate into the industry. Because of the shape of a Sycamore seedling, perhaps not as reliable, obviously with a constant cross-section of a straight conventional rotors, perhaps a little bit easier to predict and to analyze in terms of their reliability and their control. And so from leading on from that, we think that Sycamore rotors, the handling capabilities and the control perhaps may be worse. And that's obviously something that in the aerospace industry, safety is paramount. And so that may be a real downside of using those. But to conclude, really, really interesting project, really, really enjoyable, really interesting. Obviously, it's a theoretical concept at the moment. And obviously, if we were to come to a more rounded conclusion, then we need to do a lot more investigations into that. Obviously, we've seen that from the wind tunnel results, that they do have good lift generation capabilities, and that they do lend themselves to auto rotation and in generating lift there. And obviously, due to the shape, as we can see on the right-hand side of the graphic we've seen before, they are an auto-rotating body in nature. So obviously they do exhibit those auto-rotation properties that we would expect from the rotor of an autogyro. Obviously we have got a couple of downsides, and I think that kind of puts a big negative against Sycamore rotors. Obviously they are very difficult to manufacture, very difficult, complex shape in comparison to what we do have at the moment, and because of that it's more costly, more time consuming, and so quite difficult to actually implement. And obviously, as it is a theoretical concept, a new concept, there is a lack of knowledge into these shapes and whether or not we can actually integrate them into the industry, and so there will need to be some more investigations into that to come to a more rounded view. But that's an overview of my project. As I say, a really, really interesting project, taking something from nature and building on that with all the aerodynamic property, aerodynamic capabilities that we've seen. I really enjoyed the project from a personal point of view, because my aerodynamic knowledge is an area which I thought that I could really build upon. And so it's a really, really rewarding project in that regard. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening. Any questions?
Presentation concerns the compositional experimentation of additive manufacture using an embedded matrix. Presently, in the 21st century, technology has rapidly developed. However, AM holds a vast range of development opportunities. Parallel to traditional manufacturing, AM accommodates technological drawbacks encompassing poor mechanical properties throughout material structure, in contrast to the majority of composite or metallic structures within the aeronautical industry. This area of weakness is undesired, inadvertently requires technical development to improve the mechanical properties. This leads to an overarching question: how can mechanical properties associated with additive manufacturing be improved? The project aims to advance the development of FDM through the reinforcement of lattice inserts impregnated in between successive layers. The project's prime mover concerns the experimentation of various reinforcing methodologies to both demonstrate and understand project feasibility. As a result, pre-preg carbon fiber and PLA was utilized for the project. Succeeding research, practical elements concerning 3 manufacturing methodologies were established, to which each concept embodied differences. The first methodology acted as a baseline for mechanical property performance. To achieve this, a standard dog bone model was manufactured from PLA, utilizing 0% infill. The second methodology employed a 0.32mm pre-preg layer upon a successive 0.32mm FDM layer with a 0% infill. The third and last methodology adopted a 0.32mm pre-preg layer upon a successive 1.26mm FDM layer, again with a 0% infill. What were the manufacturing outcomes? The manufacture of Concept 1 was achieved with no printing complications due to sole FDM manufacture. However, the manufacture of Concept 2 exhibited comparable results, yet minimal defects were apparent upon initial layers, generating further complications as the build continued. The defect involved material placement nonconformities, in turn generating an initial localized material rise as pictured. Consequently, a non-laminar layer consisting of prickled and brazed textures was formed. It was assumed the nonconformities occurred through non-identical compressive forces during manual insertion of the pre-preg layer, in turn generating a multitude of peaks and troughs across the layup. The manufacture of Concept 3, however, exhibited greater issues. As illustrated, the non-laminar PLA layer consisting of pickled and brazed textures was formed upon the pre-preg layer, However, upon the second path extrusion, the effect was magnified, causing catastrophic defects due to the contact between the FDM layer and the printhead itself. Concept 3 was retrialed, but sadly, similar results were concluded. Thus, owing to time deadlines, manufacture of Concept 3 was demolished. What were the testing outcomes? Concept 1 achieved a relatively prompt fracture with a corresponding low tensile result. The test piece fractured at 27.23 newtons per millimeter squared, thus was highly acceptable to crack propagation and in turn rapid permanent deformation. The data correlation demonstrated a brittle failure occurred at a low stress rate at stress maximum, showing little ability to deform plastically and fracture at of near to the elastic limit. Concept 2 achieved a contrast of outcomes, however, data obtained was incomplete, following termination of tests across 2 attempts. In contrast, the jaws of tensile test machine lacked the ability to compress the test samples without slippage. Resultantly, test sample 1 failed at around 55 newtons per millimeter squared, and test sample 2 failed at around 130 newtons per millimeter squared. The data correlation demonstrated each sample exhibited a low yield point to which the signs of strain hardening occurred during plastic deformation until sample slippage. Upon data scrutiny, Concept 1 embodied a greater yield point than Concept 2. However, fracture occurred at or near after. However, both samples of Concept 2 embodied plastic deformation at a rate close to its yield stress strain correlation before slippage occurred. Thus, the project deemed the embodiment of structural inserts improved thermoplastic polymer tensile properties by a rate greater than 4.7 times the result of pure FDM. Furthermore, recommendations were put forth in order to mitigate the prickled and brazed textures formations during manufacturing. This involved using a multitude of jigs ranging various build heights, as illustrated, conjunctionally the incorporation of a smoothing mechanism upon succeeding FDM layers. In particular, aspirations concerning experimentation of epoxy resin acting as a body filler, in contrast, acetone to remove unwanted surface defects and in turn polish the surface. Thank you for your time. Does anyone have any questions?
My name is Simon Weait. As well as being the Curriculum Programme Manager for Higher Education here at Yeovil College, I'm also a PhD researcher with the University of Plymouth. The research question is, can a swarm of 3D printed drones be used to support high-rise building firefighting operations? In 2017, we experienced the Grenfell Tower fire tragedy. When it was reported, it occurred to me that could a swarm of 3D printed drones around that building help support firefighting and emergency operations and rescue operations? Well, for a firefighter, there's very significant challenges for high-rise buildings. It's just the physical access to those higher floors. How do we get equipment to those higher floors? How can we get immediate firefighting to those higher floors? How can we actually get essential breathing apparatus to those higher floors? Because a fireperson on a breathing apparatus only has a certain amount of time in order to get to that higher floor. So they're using a lot of their oxygen in their bottles just to get equipment to, say, the next floor or the next 3 or 4 floors. So therefore the equipment process, or the equipment dumps as they call them, onto higher floors, takes a certain amount of time, takes a longer amount of time. But at the same time, the commanders on the scene also need to know critical information. Where are the victims? Where's the seat of the fire? Where is the fire likely to spread to? Has the fire spread? Where is it spread to? So we've also got commander control information needed, and it's needed as quickly as possible, so the firefighting and emergency resources can be targeted as quickly as possible. Well, a swarm of drones. Why a swarm? Well, we've seen in the Olympics opening ceremony swarms of drones dancing around the night sky in a beautiful display of lights under such high levels and degrees of control. Well, that's there. Well, we could use that control, we could use that swarm around the building. We could have those drones with cameras who could then do the command and control information gathering. You could have 20, 30, 40 drones around that building, all sending back information to the control point and the command and control point for the fire. You could have a drone carrying fire extinguishers. There are fire extinguishers out there now that when dropped directly into a fire, discharge, the fire then burns a disc, and that then it sets off the fire extinguisher, and the fire is extinguished within that room. We could have a drone carrying emergency breathing apparatus to victims on the higher floors. So these are all areas that are very easily achievable within drones. Now this is information that's there now. This is things we could do now without any issues. That could easily be developed. But there is one big challenge to those drones, and that is from the environment that they're going to have to operate within. So within a fire, we get a very extreme environment, and there are 2 main areas of attack that drone is going to have to face. Within a thermal plume of a fire, temperatures are easily in excess of 600 degrees C. It's also operating in a very chemically unstable and toxic environment as well. So any drone operating in this environment has to be protected. And if it's a 3D printed polymer, then most of those polymers, most of those plastics, they change, they become very malleable, and they lose their mechanical characteristics round about anywhere between 80 to 130 degrees. So we're a long way off the temperatures of a thermal plume given off by a fire. So how can we change it? How can we put some sort of protection in place onto that polymer to then make it thermally more stable? Well, I came up with this idea of using a polymer called polysiloxane. Now, polysiloxanes can be pyrolyzed into a ceramic material, and that ceramic material could then be used as a coating. Now, the ceramic material, once it is being made into a coating, is very heat resistant. It makes a very effective thermal barrier. So the challenge in my research is how to carry out that pyrolysis. One of the ways I've been looking into is to use microwave radiation, and also I've been looking into using laser energy, photons, light energy. Well, with the microwave radiation, as you can see here on this slide, when it was irradiated from a 900 watt magnetron, it was irradiated for about 1.5 minutes. and the centre temperature of the sample reached 71.3 degrees. When I irradiated it for a further 15 seconds, that temperature went up to around about 94 degrees. But interestingly, it went past what's called the glass transition point of the polymer, and that's the point where it loses its all mechanical strength and it becomes very malleable and flexible and remoldable. That's not hot enough to carry out the pyrolysis. So the microwave is still under investigation. However, my main focus at the moment is looking at the use of laser energy, because laser energy is a lot more precise. The burn area is a lot more centered and controlled. So I'm looking for the polymer not to lose its mechanical characteristics and its shape. So how does it work? Well, the laser is light, and photons, light photons, basically emitted from the laser, and then they hit the surface of the polymer. The photons add energy to the molecules within the polymer, and it's that energy which then excites those molecules, which then generates the heat in that local area. And as you can see here on this slide, this is where it's actually burned off an area, but it's a very precise area that you can control. So with the laser, it gives you a much higher degree of control on the area that I could pyrolysize. Here is some work from photos from my earlier work, and on the upper photo you can actually see where the laser area has moulded and melted the top layers of that 3D printed sample. The lower photo actually shows a non-lasered sample, and you can then see the layers of the 3D printing. But you can see the upper layers, the upper 4 layers, have actually moulded together by the laser. So the prediction is that we are generating in that area at least 200 degrees C. Okay, that is at least 200 degrees C in that area, and hopefully my future research will be looking into and proving that that has happened, but also that that will be able to carry out the pyrolysis. So if my research goes well and I'm able to achieve this end goal, where is it going to take us? Well, there are lots of applications. 3D printing is a very quick way of manufacturing polymers into components for critical areas. We have firefighting in a marine environment, forest fires, a swarm of drones, for example, in a forest fire, could be very critical. But not just in emergency situations. We could 3D print components for cars, for vehicles, for aircraft that are in very high temperature areas. So the manufacturing of components would become very much quicker and cheaper. And it would also open up different possibilities with different materials. We could also do for, say, nuclear power stations. Yeah, anywhere there's an extreme environment, we could then, at the moment, they have to do very high levels of precision engineering in order to get those components. But certain components could be opened up to be made much quicker and much cheaper with this method, if it's successful. Thank you very much for watching my presentation and listening, and would like to ask if anybody has any questions.
going to hear from Victoria, who is currently undertaking her teacher training with us. This is an absolutely brilliant look at memory and how do we remember things. And as a teacher, how can you support young people to remember what you're studying with them?
Hi there, my name's Vicky Moore. I work at Yeovil College as the Lab Tech Apprenticeship Programme Manager, and as part of my Level 5 Diploma in Education and Teaching, I was required to perform an action research project, which I chose to do on converting short-term memories into long-term memories. So the process of changing short-term to long-term memory is known as consolidation, which teachers will be very aware of that word. It is, short-term memories really are just that, only 30 seconds. So have you ever tried to read something that's perhaps quite complicated, think you've got a handle of it, and then somebody comes in and maybe asks you if you want a cup of tea, and then that's it. Whatever you have read has just completely gone. That is because there is a competing stimulus for your short-term memory. So my approach to converting short to long-term memory was two-pronged. Firstly, to take a multi-sensory approach to my teaching, and secondly, to use something known as insight learning. We will look at what those mean in just a moment. Short-term memories are formed right in the centre of the brain in a part called the hippocampus. But when they are being transferred to a long-term memory, they move from the hippocampus to the outer areas of the brain. And depending on which stimulus is used, depends on which area they go to. So echoing-led sensory theory, who was an educational theorist, he states that if you use multi-sensory approaches of teaching, therefore the memories are laid down in different areas of the brain. And he also stated that if you use only one channel to produce a long-term memory, that channel can then become flooded and saturated and no longer be able to take in information. So this image is just showing you the different areas of the brain. So if you use a visual stimulus, for example, then the memory gets laid down into the visual cortex, auditory into the auditory, and so on. So as these neural pathways alter, they sort of create a pathway, just like if you were to try and find a certain place in the woods, for example. It would be much easier for you to find that place once again if there is a pathway laid down to it, a well-trodden path. So if you can create accurate pathways towards the recall, then your students will therefore be able to access their information much more efficiently and accurately. So that's the multisensory part of my research. So what's the insight learning? Insight learning is also known as the Gestalt theory of learning. And it is a type of learning that is particularly useful for logic-based subjects such as maths and science. It's thought to be the most powerful type of learning, and that is because it is absolutely not about spoon-feeding your students information. It's about allowing them to take information that they already know from experiences that they already have and linking those to a theory that you are trying to teach them, taking what they know, applying it to a new thing, and then you will get insight learning occur. So this is the approach that I took when teaching my students using insight learning. You need to be really cautious to allow each student to progress at their own pace, because every student has their own different levels of life experience, and particularly for the sort of younger age groups, like sort of 16 to 18-year-olds, they have different levels of maturation as well. But what I did do is I took those things that students would know, things they would be aware of or have experienced, very basic things, and gave them the theory that you could apply that to. So, for example, when I was trying to teach them about quite a complex theory of nerve transmission called saltatory conduction, which is a jumping type motion, I gave them the example of forming a human chain, just like you have seen so many forces would do when they are loading up trucks or whatever. They form a human chain from point A to point B. And to minimise the time, they would, perhaps sort of gently, carefully chuck the parcels to their neighbour, forming this sort of jumping motion, which means that it would travel much quicker than the hand-to-hand equivalent. And this I used to demonstrate saltatory transmission in a nerve, which has this jumping motion. So did this type of teaching work, and what were my results? So I measured this by giving my students an initial quiz right at the very beginning of the unit before I had taught them any information whatsoever. We then repeated that quiz right at the end, with a few extra added, slightly more difficult questions. In addition, in between, there were 3 starter quizzes. Not all of the students completed these for various reasons. They either weren't in the session or had technical issues. Initially, 53% of the students scored under 50%. At the final quiz, 53% of them scored over 71%, with 4 of my small sample size of 17 students that I was able to use in the results, scoring between 91 and 100%. So I would argue that yes, it has worked in the sense of the level of learning that has taken place has been really very high level. Finally, this is a list of references. So if you want to look into any of this further, this is where you go to. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you find it useful and interesting. And thank you for listening.
Next up today, we're going to look at some research around learning resource development conducted by 2 members of our staff at college. First of all, we're going to hear about Karen, who's doing some really cutting-edge research into digital technologies and how students' ways of learning have changed during the pandemic and how we can meet that need. After that, we're going to hear from April, who's reporting on actually quite a long-term research project she's been engaged in as to the role libraries can play in supporting people with their mental health and well-being.
Hi, I'm Karen Foster. I'm Head of Learning Centres at Yeovil College, and I'm going to talk to you today about the Jisc Digital Insights Survey, why I carried it out, and what the results were. Okay, so the Jisc Digital Insights Survey is carried out every year by a company called Jisc, and they work for HE and FE. And we've never done the survey before, but this year I wanted to do it because students have been accessing online lessons and want to capture their views on that, as well as their access to IT and their own devices at home, their access to assistive technology should they need them, how they've been using these online learning environments in the last year, and how their digital skills have been coping with that, and have they been staying safe online. So as I said, this is a national survey, so we do our own part of this survey and we get our own results back. And this feeds into the national survey. In 2020, the national survey had 20,000 FE students or 36 colleges participate, and over 20,000 HE students and 28 universities participate. So why did I want to do this survey this year? So I wanted to give our students a voice about their digital access and their experiences so I could share that back with managers and staff at the college. We needed to understand where students were with their own devices and whether or not they needed loan devices and what percentage of students needed this. Obviously, we already had a good idea of this figure from people who had actually borrowed devices, but we still wanted to carry out the survey to find out what people said. We wanted to understand how they felt about their online lessons and their experiences during COVID year. We wanted to gain insight on what they liked and disliked about their online lessons as well. Importantly for me personally was understanding whether or not they use assistive technologies, because I've been part of the team rolling out the web accessibility regulations within the organisation. And really importantly to me was I wanted to propose a digital skills training framework for students. And I wasn't quite sure what to include in that framework, and I was hoping that the survey would give me some ideas. So we had a fairly good response to the survey. We had around 20% of our whole student cohort responding. I'd liked a few more, but when I looked at the detail of those that are responding, the curriculum areas they came from, every single curriculum area was represented across the organisation. So I felt that the 20% were quite representative of our student cohort, both HE and FE. So first of all, one of the questions that I picked out was, when you've been learning online, have there been any problems? So the suitable device, because obviously I was particularly interested in whether or not people actually had a device they could use at home. Most people did, but 6% said that they didn't. They did not really have access to a suitable device. So that kind of fitted with where we thought the students were. We were aiming to provide devices for around 9 to 10% of our learners. So that was a fairly similar result. It's below the national average. The other question we asked was about poor Wi-Fi. So had that been a problem? You can't quite really see the results here, but I can tell you that 52% of learners felt that poor Wi-Fi had hindered their learning during this year. That is actually quite a bit above the national average for this survey. Normally it's around 36%. So perhaps that is something to do with living in more rural areas, living in Somerset, perhaps not having fast Wi-Fi or fast 4G like other parts of the country do. So this is a question about assistive technologies. So do you use any of these assistive technologies? And the answers were things like screen readers, dictation, magnification, and a fair few of our students did use it. Around 6% use screen readers, 5% dictation, magnifiers 3%. What was quite interesting is whether or not you've been offered support with these assistive technologies, and over 12% of our learners said yes, they had been. So I think the support mechanism is very good, but perhaps we could widen general use of assistive technologies for all people, regardless of whether or not they have a need, and give them a better understanding of how assistive technologies can make learning online easier for them. The next question that I picked out was, how much do you agree your online environment is well designed? So 51% agreed and 42% were neutral, so not many disagreed. And kind of the neutral ones, perhaps we needed to find out a little bit more detail about why they didn't feel that they could fully agree. We asked the question about easy navigation for your online environment. Is it easy to navigate? So 60% said yes, but that does leave us with 7% who disagreed and 33% that were neutral. So part of the thing that I'm looking at is whether or not we can put a digital skills package in place for students, particularly around early skills when they start their course, particularly around navigation, finding your way around. We didn't particularly do that this year, and obviously Teams is very new to us and very new to the teachers as well. So I would hope by putting a digital skills package in place that we could improve these results next year and more students move from that neutral up into the agreed, that they feel it's well designed and they can easily navigate around it once they understand how it actually works. One of the questions I picked out from the surveys in the last 2 weeks, which of these learning activities have you carried out online? 16% of students had online teaching and live lectures, or 6% had accessed recordings, and 8% there have interacted with quizzes and games online, for example. We had quite a lot of students who submitted coursework in the last 2 weeks, over 13%, and got feedback on their work over 12% as well. How much do you agree that we support you in using your own digital devices? So quite a high proportion of students actually said yes, 70%. I was actually quite surprised by this because we haven't put a digital skills package in place, and yet a lot of students did feel supported in being able to use their own devices and be able to access their learning either from home or bring those devices into college and use them. And how much do you agree that we enable you to access online systems and services from anywhere? So we might come back here to the kind of navigation question, and it might fit in with those kind of results that we had earlier. So 68% did agree that we have enabled them to use online systems and services from anywhere. But a good proportion, nearly 30%, were very neutral on this and perhaps didn't understand the question. And again, one of the things I want to put into the digital skills package next year is using things like OneDrive and be able to access your work anytime, anyplace, anywhere. So this academic year, which of the following have you been offered in support and training to develop? So 31% of students said they had been offered basic IT skills, and we have been running a project called Narrowing the Gap, which includes IT skills for some students. We'd like to broaden that and offer that to the majority of students rather than the 30%. So have we offered you support in online learning? So 78% said yes on that. So obviously the teachers have really supported the students in being able to access their work. All the other questions, including online learning, specialist software, checking your progress, keeping yourself safe, avoiding plagiarism, although those results are fairly mixed in their responses, they are all higher than the Jisc national averages that you have seen in the national surveys of recent times. So actually we're quite pleased with results that our students are feeling relatively confident. Perhaps the digital skills package can also improve on these scores next year. The most interesting thing was the things that students actually said when they were asked a free question of what aspects of online learning, if any, have been most positive for you, and they could just type their own results. These were far more telling than the set questions where they could just choose an answer. Overall, the most positive experiences for students, these are just a few samples. We had over 300 students give us a response on this question. Overall, a lot of students liked the fact that they could do theory lessons from home, so they didn't have to travel or pay for a bus or get up early, and they could access their theory lessons like that. They liked that. They actually thought that the platforms we use aided communication. It was quite easy to communicate between themselves or their peers and the tutors, for example. It was really interesting how many students said that they felt that they had really improved their skills by doing the work online over the last year, that they'd made good progress. And it made them be more independent and encouraged them how to use technology more effectively. We had quite a few students who gave responses similar to that. We asked them what aspects of their online learning has been more negative for them. Overwhelmingly, many students said the social side. They missed the social interaction of coming in and meeting other students, certainly. There are many students who also said they missed the practical side, doing practical lessons, because obviously online, the majority is theory. There are quite a few students who talked about fatigue and screen fatigue and headaches, those kind of things. So digital wellbeing is actually really important and will form part of our package. This year we have offered some digital wellbeing via Moodle, but we'd like to do a little bit more on that in the future. So looking at the results overall, what would we like to do next? So definitely like to engage with the students to get more results next year, more than the 20% we had this year. It'd be great to have some more students involved and to get more feedback. We'd definitely like to design a digital skills package for our students at all levels in order that they can engage better with the digital technologies around them. We definitely want to provide more basic support at the beginning of the year, things like how to work your way around Teams and orientate yourself. We want to improve our way that we support our digitally disadvantaged students and make sure we have devices for them and laptops for them, for example, as part of the digital laptop scheme that the government rolled out. We'd like to improve how students access the platform, because remember, one of the things that they said they found difficult was navigation. So again, that forms part of the digital skills package. We'd like to work with the teaching, learning, assessment and quality teams to help them analyse the results from this survey, so they can share in more detail with the results with staff and use the results to improve teaching, learning and assessment. That's the end of my presentation. If you would like to find out more about the Jisc Digital Insights Survey, there is a link here to their website, which includes all the reports from previous years. You can also contact me. My email address is there, karen.foster@yeovil.ac.uk, if you'd like to find out more about the Digital Insights Survey for Yeovil College and the University Centre. Thank you.
Centre team here at Yeovil College University Centre. Today I'm here to talk to you about one of our initiatives, Fully Booked for Shelf Help, building and promoting mental health and wellbeing resources and developing best practice in academic libraries. We aim to build a collection of inclusive resources in a variety of formats that are suitable for FE and HE students in our FE college and specific community. The young adult demographic, which begins from the teenage years roughly onwards to early 20s, is anecdotally the hardest demographic for libraries to target and attract with initiatives. This age group, especially young women and LGBTQA+ individuals, are consistently found to be at-risk groups for developing or experiencing poor mental health and related disorders. Currently, this is extremely pertinent with the impact of the COVID pandemic on children and young people. Libraries have historically focused on providing relevant resources, services, and a safe and welcoming environment for users who would find these beneficial and valuable. Existing schemes in public libraries include the Reading Well scheme, books on prescription in conjunction with GPs and the NHS, and other well-documented initiatives that we researched alongside a variety of projects and expertise in individual library settings locally and nationally. Currently, the Reading Well and books on prescription lists and items may be placed in public libraries within their own section, predominantly within the adult collection. The books may not always be the most accessible in terms of language, aesthetic, topics or content, specifically for this young adult audience. We felt this could provide a barrier. We also felt the importance of providing a physical space to unite the identification of the physical library as a safe space, which then helps to alleviate fears or concerns regarding identification with issues publicly. This can be a barrier to students accessing materials when they feel that they may be judged or treated unfairly. We also felt it was important to have an outward manifestation of commitment and values and to provide an appropriate area to browse and explore texts in a safe and quiet way. Therefore, we committed to creating and maintaining a focused wellbeing area with curated texts and resources, promoting these efficiently across the college community to see what impact it had, and over time to work on evolving our collection and practice. With the evidence appertaining to mental health within this core age group that we serve as a community, we felt ideally placed to work on improving access to mental health resources, to signpost further services and access to information, and this is what we did. Firstly, we focused on design and creation of a physical well-being space. It was placed to enable quiet browsing without being overlooked, to allow those who are in distress or requiring quiet to have a space to access these without question. We then provided a specific logo and branding for materials, and to set the tone of the space in the collection, we provided extra leaflets, magazines and so on that were carefully curated. We promoted the space and collection explicitly and implicitly with targeted and open outreach events and activities, more later. For the collection, we researched and acquired resources and specific texts suitable for the current college demographic, with a key focus on those age groups or at-risk groups that we felt would benefit most. We have university-specific texts that deal with anxiety, stress and resilience to complement our extensive study skills collection. We have many different types of books, ranging from workbooks to visual guides, memoirs to structured self-help, and even graphic novels to serve different needs and levels. This is important because sometimes adult-focused content might not resonate with our specific student age group. We were also committed to accessibility and inclusivity. So there are ebooks and digitised magazine articles available to enable students access without needing to physically borrow them. This, as a process, has improved access to these resources, and digital access allows privacy and reassurance. We have a good selection of LGBTQA+ focused materials and resources covering coming out, trans and non-binary experience, and they complement our existing texts and initiatives to integrate those kind of texts within a subject-specific format within a variety of different academic areas. Equally, we have neurodivergent specific resources for those with autism around studying life skills and relationships, and a focus on BAME and BIPOC authors and materials, which we focus on as a growth area, along with texts on body positivity, healthy eating and other well-being themes. This basically shows our overarching commitment to equality, diversity and inclusivity within the wider collection, in our curated reading lists and subject areas, and in our promotional events. Here is a table outlining our impact and outreach activities. It's divided into active and passive, and activities where we explicitly promoted and those where it was implicitly promoted as part of the culture. As you can see, there's a wide range in every category, from tours and sessions, social media and conferences, to Wellbeing Week displays, Freshers' Fair stall and other promotional materials and events. We also have included it as an integral area within our practice and our showcasing to students, and it is part of the embedded culture and practice of the LRC team, so that we build the collection going forward and we focus on providing to students that open access as needed to the resources they need. In conclusion, it has been a successful initiative, but one that with each year requires nurturing, growth and continued engagement. To continue with this, we will look at building the collection year on year. We will look at current use and see which areas are proving popular or most needed. We will continue to liaise with the student support team in order to provide leaflets and materials as they require and for their practice to inform ours. We will start to encourage more use by HE and Access students, and that's something that we would currently very much like to do, including a focus at looking at either mature students or those with existing medical conditions. Finally, we would like to continue to engage staff, especially post-COVID, in exploring and promoting the collection, not only for their own well-being, but for their professional practice and to showcase to students.
We're going to look at today is some practical work. These are the final outputs that have been produced by some of our foundation degree photography students. So we're going to share with you some of the fantastic work that they've produced as we bring today's event to a close. end of today's event, and I want to thank you for coming and for finding out more about what we do at Yeovil College University Centre. I really hope that you found today's presentations interesting and that you've learnt something that you didn't know about before. If you've got any questions at all about today's event, about some of the topics that you've heard about the University Centre, about who we are and what we do, please get in touch. You can head to our website, www.yeovil.ac.uk. You can send us an email, university.centre@yeovil.ac.uk, or give us a call. We really look forward to speaking to you. Our number is 01935 845454. So once again, thank you for coming along today. A huge thank you to our students and staff who've contributed today, and also to our colleagues in creative and marketing who've helped us to put today's event together. Take care.